On behalf of the Advocus Partners companies, welcome to this second Advocus poll among 1,000 voters across the country. The field dates for this survey were September 12th through 15th of this year. So post the second debate, which was the first after the Democratic nominee was replaced, but before the second attempt on the former president and candidate's life. If that sentence doesn't encapsulate the volatility of this election, I don't think anything else does. One understanding as you go into this, especially with regards to the presidential numbers, these are national numbers, and it represents a representative look of voters across the country. Ultimately, what matters in many of presidential campaigns, especially this one, is going to be the Electoral College, and it comes down to a handful of states. There are a lot of takeaways, I think, from these national numbers that help us understand what's going on and what has gone on over the last couple of weeks, especially. So we'll be focusing on voters' views of the presidential campaign and the candidates primarily, and then we'll get into some issues. We're going to talk about some of the broad focuses that voters have in terms of issues, with cost of living concerns being a particular focus. We'll talk a little bit about the upcoming tax debate of 2025 and tort reform, and then end on some questions that we've added concerning corporate purpose, what voters expect from American businesses versus what they see that they are getting. So when we look at the political environment first, the first number that comes out of the poll is a two-way head-to-head presidential ballot right now. Overall, Kamala Harris has a 4-point advantage over Donald Trump, 49 to 45. You have 6% of the electorate saying that they are undecided. One clear takeaway from this number in the last couple weeks is a differential in terms of base intensity. Those who are usual Republican voters say that they support Trump at 89%, with 6% for Harris. Those who are usual Democratic voters, 94% for Harris and 4% for Trump. So there is a disparity there. You also see among the base Democratic voters higher level of definite voting. 82% of Democrats say they are definitely for Harris, 74% definitely for Trump. Part of this is reflected in the advantage that Harris has regained with younger voters, with African-American voters, part of the Democratic base that prior to her taking over as the nominee were a bit soft for President Biden on the ballot. Many of those have come home. Now, there's the few ticket splitters. There's not a great number in here in this survey who identify as pure ticket splitters. She is winning them as well, 42 to 31, 28% of those are undecided. Where is some of this underperformance coming from right now? You can see men are only +5 for Trump, while Harris is leading among women by 12 points. Some of that underperformance is some men, and it's particularly some college-educated men who are right now 45 to 50, with that 5-point advantage going to Harris. As has been consistent, college-educated women 37 to 57. And then finally, you can see some of the breakdowns by race and ethnicity. White voters 52 to 42, Black or African-American voters 16 to 79 supporting Harris here. Hispanic voters only a 10-point differential, 42 for Trump and 52 for Harris. And then everyone else, smaller groups that we can't look at individually in the lens of a survey, are giving Harris an advantage. We also asked a multi-candidate ballot that included Kennedy, Stein, and Oliver into the mix. Now, understanding that Kennedy isn't on the ballot in every state, it doesn't tell us much nationally, but it does indicate where the lingering impact, particularly of Kennedy, remains. When you add these third-party candidates into the mix nationally, Harris is +6, 47 to 41. And those Kennedy voters, who are 5% still saying that they would opt in for Kennedy nationally, whether or not he's available for them in their state, they're 6% from the Trump voters on that last question that we asked, but only 3% of Harris voters. So there's still an indication that the lingering impact of Kennedy is working against Trump. Now, I would expect that, especially in states where he's not available, to shrink over time as voters begin to understand whether or not he's on. You also see the Green and Libertarian each pulling 1% apiece. But when we look at the states that are competitive right now in the Electoral College, when it comes down to a point, they can be spoilers as well. 1% from Stein and 1% from Oliver, taking from either candidate, can make a difference in those key swing states. We started asking voters in this survey who they think will win the election. Now, this is something that is in some ways tethered to who they're supporting, but is also allowed to mix and move a little bit as voters have some faith or confidence in their nominee. You can see Trump voters, 79% say that they think their candidate will win. That's 82% among Harris voters. Usual Republican voters writ large are a little bit less sure, 72 to 11% thinking that Harris is going to win. So it's only a 7-point margin here. But Republican voters a little less certain right now, post the debate again. Now, this will be something to watch if it swings as we go further into the fall. In 2016, the conventional wisdom was that Hillary Clinton would win, and national polls had her up. She did win by 2 points overall, but it ultimately drove perhaps some check and balance ticket splitters to vote Republican down ticket in the Senate or congressional races. This can also have an impact on turnout in some races, where if one segment or one voting bloc feels particularly demoralized, they can begin to stay home. We didn't see that in 2016. Despite the fact that belief that Hillary Clinton was going to win among more voters, the Trump vote still came out. I would also say when we look at all these numbers that there's still a great deal of time. There's still 50 days until the election. And at this point in 2020, Biden was +7 on the ballot over Trump and ended up +4 at the end. So there is certainly, not only in the national numbers, but in the state numbers as well, the capability of these numbers to continue to shift. We asked about voters' views of President Biden. We didn't ask his personal view. We asked the job approval, perhaps more relevant here. There's some indication that the personal feelings towards Biden a little bit have improved since he got out of the race, partly driven by some Democrats perhaps expressing some gratefulness that happened. But when we still look at the disapproval, 55% of voters say they disapprove of the job that President Joe Biden is doing. And there's still some of those younger Democrats and independents, the ones that Harris was more likely to be able to bring back into the party and into her campaign, who still have some of that lingering negativity. Now, when we look at ticket splitters, that small group that we saw earlier that Harris had an advantage with, they're at 25 approved to 61% disapprove. So the question for both campaigns is, one, can the Trump campaign effectively link Harris to this majority who continue to disapprove of Joe Biden and his administration? At the same time, can the Harris campaign continue to lead voters to more disassociate her connections to their negative feelings about the Biden administration and make it more about her and Donald Trump? So when we get voters to focus on the candidates, first of all, we asked not only personal image, but job approval. And there are some distinct differences. So we asked, do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of each candidate personally? And you can see that Kamala Harris has a 48% favorable, 47% unfavorable, and Donald Trump 41 favorable, 55% unfavorable towards him. Now, Republicans are more unified, unfavorable towards Harris. There's some Republican voters, you can see he's at a 79 to 18 favorable to unfavorable. Democrats are much more in a unified block, 91% unfavorable towards Trump and 90% favorable towards Harris. We look at job approvals. Now, we ask this as a retrospective job approval on Donald Trump and one about Harris as her job as vice president. You can see here Trump actually has a small advantage. 50% say they approve of the way Donald Trump handled his job as president, 47 disapprove. And for Harris, she's marginally upside down. 45% say they approve of the job she's doing as vice president. 47% say that they disapprove. Again, a far cry from the 55% who say that they disapprove of the job Joe Biden's doing. And that difference is more stark when we look at those ticket splitting voters who are more split on Trump, 44-47. They're upside down on Harris, 34-45. But Biden's at 61 with those ticket splitters. So even though she is upside down with them and Trump marginally so, and he has a slight advantage, there's still more of those voters, those pure ticket splitters who say that they disapprove of Biden. The other way to look at this too is to compare each candidate's favorability versus their job approval. For Donald Trump, consistently 41% of the electorate have a favorable impression and approve of the job he did as president. 9% only approve of the job he's doing or has done, but are not favorable towards him personally, and only 1% are favorable only. So there's a significant number and a significant difference who are more likely to say they approve. For Harris, she has 43% who are both favorable and approve of the job she's doing. She has 5% who are only favorable towards her personally, and just 2% who approve of the job she's doing but are not favorable. You add all those together, who at least have a favorable or approval rating or both, and that's 51% for Trump, 50% for Harris. Clearly, the job approval measure is one that benefits the Trump campaign, not surprisingly, whereas this image measure is much stronger for Harris. We then provide a couple forced choice questions to put a little bit more of a fine point on it and ask about who you think cares more about people like you, and no matter who they might vote for, which candidate do you think would do a better job handling the issues you care most about broadly. Here you can see Harris has an advantage. It's in green on caring about people like you. 39% say Trump, 48% say Harris. When we ask about issues, though, 46% Trump, 46% say Harris. It's much more even, and is clearly an indication, along with those job approvals, that as much as the Trump campaign wants to make this about the issues and about the Biden administration, the Harris campaign wants to keep this about personalities and personal images of the candidates. Turning to the debate and the impact, now we have 59% who say that they watched the debate, 37% say they saw some clips, 17% saw some coverage. We allowed multiple responses to this question. There's a little bit of inflation here. Some voters don't want to admit not having necessarily done their homework, but still 67 million are reported to have watched the debate. When we ask voters overall who won, 53% majority say that Kamala Harris won the debate. 24% say Trump won the debate. 15% say neither. 6% are unsure. Only 2% say they both won it. When you look at their own supporters, though, tells much of the story. Among Harris voters, 93% say that they believe she won the debate. Among Trump voters, 51% believe he won the debate, 12% for Harris, and the rest primarily saying that neither. You can see it among the overall partisans as well. Having watched the debate, it's 60% for Harris to 24% for Trump among those voters. But knowing that that segment of those who say they did watch are just naturally a little bit more Democratic. Republicans were a little less likely to say that they had paid attention. So turning to the issues, we asked voters about the top of mind issues, and we provided them this list asking which one is most important, next most important for the president and Congress to focus on. You can see cost of living and higher prices continues to dominate the top of mind thoughts of voters. At 60%, either naming it most important or next most important. You can see illegal immigration and border security, named by 32%, and the economy and jobs at 30%, other issues down in the teens or lower. When we look at where voters are voting by each of these issues. Among those who say immigration, this is largely a Republican issue. 72% say that they're voting for Trump, 77% to 20% for Harris. But they say their usual vote behavior, that same segment, 61 to 12. So those ticket splitters and those independents that Trump is pulling right now are some of those more likely focused on illegal immigration and border security. Cost of living and higher prices, Trump leads among that 60% of the electorate who say that either first or second most important. He leads them 54 to 40. He leads economy and jobs voters 49 to 45. Even those who say budget deficit and tax and the national debt is only 10% of the electorate, Trump leads those voters as well. So the margin, much of the margin for Harris right now is coming from those who say one of the other issues on the long tail, Social Security and Medicare, she's getting 72% of those voters. If they say the issue of abortion is most important to them, 86%, healthcare, 76%, environment, 88%. Those voters are driving that Harris ballot down in the long tail of these issues, even though Trump is winning on the issues that are named most frequently by voters. We then dove in a little bit more and asked voters which type of economic concerns that they have. Ask them, is this a concern? If so, is it a major or not a major concern for you? You can see in red the combined concern levels. You can see the two that stand out, affording basics like groceries at 75% combined, saying that it is at least somewhat of a concern. Affording necessary healthcare or prescriptions, 71% saying it is a concern. The one that stands out with intensity is affording basics like groceries. And when you see that pop up, you can see partisan-wise, that is one that elevates among both Republicans and Democrats, as well as the ticket splitters. It is in the 40s with ticket splitters and Democrats, up to 54 with Republicans. And it is one felt more acutely by those who, in their own self-described questions, say they are either identify as lower middle class or working lower class voters. Much more impact for that issue. But you can see healthcare into the 40s among the lower middle class as well, and in the upper 40s with working the lower class. You can see rent and mortgage and affordable housing issues popping into a majority, but particularly for those who consider themselves working class. We then turn to 2025, which seems like a million years from now in the political context, but wanted to ask voters, just what have you heard about this looming tax debate? Knowing that the U.S. tax code was changed in 2017, the legislation known as TCJA lowered individual federal income tax rates and will expire. The next president and Congress will need to decide what to do. Have you seen, read, or heard anything about this issue? Only 13% say that they've seen, read, or heard a lot, more likely to be some college educated and upper middle class or above. Another 31% say they've heard some. There's not a lot of awareness to this. One thing to understand as we get into these more specific issue questions too, is that given this sort of low level awareness, framing of these questions is critically important. Every bit of information that we give to voters in these issue questions, for many of them, is new information. So when we're defining these questions, think about them in the context that we're framing them. So we say, first of all, in 2025, generally speaking, should the next president and Congress allow individual tax rates to increase or vote to keep individual tax rates at their current level? 62% of voters say keep at their current level. 70% of Republicans, it's 52% of Democrats as well, 68% of those ticket splitters. Now, no issue is ever this simple. What voters know versus what you're telling them in a question versus all the consequences that may come from these. We haven't added. We've just simply asked them, do you think they should allow them to increase or keep them? And voters, more than 6 in 10, say keep at the current rates. We also asked about price controls because there's been some discussion of this in the campaigns. Now, we give voters some basic information in this framing. Should the next president and Congress pass price controls to prevent corporations from raising prices on consumers? Within that framing, again, apart from consequences that economists may argue negative consequences of price controls. But we don't introduce it here. Just asking this straight up question on the term 65% majority say, yes, we should have some form of price controls. But I think the takeaway for both this question and the prior is that without information on negative consequences, voters are primed to side with the cause or issue that would seem to make their life more affordable. And who wins that argument for voters in this context when 60% are focused on cost of living, and we have large numbers saying that they can't afford the basics like groceries, or at least have concerns about it, or say they have concerns about healthcare prescriptions. When we address these specific issues that can be upcoming, whoever frames that issue and how that issue is framed is going to determine at least where voters begin and start their responses and reaction to those proposals. On tort reform, we took a little different approach where we gave voters two different views, asking telling them that some people say the government should pass laws reforming the way civil cases are handled to reduce the excessive number of frivolous lawsuits. Others say people should be free to sue who they feel has harmed them, especially big corporations, and it is a right that should be protected. Here, 53% side with the statement that we should pass laws to reduce frivolous lawsuits. 32% side with the statement that we should protect people's right to sue. Here, also a partisan difference. Republicans climb to 60% for reform. At the same time, Democrats are more split on this issue, 45% for reform, 40% for protecting people's right to sue. I'll end on asking some questions and showing some results on corporate purpose. And we wanted to get a sense of what do voters feel is important for American businesses and corporations to do? What actions are important for them to take? And we provided them a list of these statements and asked if it was extremely, very, somewhat, not at all important to them. And I've ranked their responses. They were asked in a rotated way, but you can see there are 5 overall that score over 80%, either extremely or very. But those top 4 where we see the extremely score get to a 50% majority or higher. Promoting an economy that serves all Americans, investing in their employees by compensating them fairly and providing benefits, building an economy that allows each person to succeed through hard work and creativity, and build an economy that allows each person to lead a life of meaning and dignity. Look, there is a partisan lens to this, and I think that's important as individual companies and industries look at what is expected of them by the electorate or those that they care about. But for Republicans, for instance, serving all Americans, succeeding through hard work and dignity, through hard work and creativity, excuse me, both of those are extremely important for a majority of Republicans. For Democrats, we also see, besides those two scoring well, the fair compensation and benefits, as well as life of meaning and dignity, also into a majority range, and a big differential on sustainability and DEI. Large partisan differences on each of those, which is not surprising. Then we asked voters to then rank or rate American businesses and corporations on each of these. And you can see that only 16%, none of these scores do voters feel that corporations and businesses have done a strongly good job on any of these. And in fact, only 2 crack 50%, investing in their employees by training them and helping them develop new skills at 52%, and supporting the local communities in which they work, also at 52%. Now, investing in them by compensating and providing benefits gets to 49%, building an economy that allows each person to succeed through hard work and creativity, also at 49%, but none of these are felt very strongly. So this, again, sets a benchmark against which, again, individual industries and companies may differ, but for comparison. But by and large, voters want these companies and corporations in America to help build an economy that allows success, serves Americans, compensates them, and gives them benefits and allows them to lead that life of dignity and meaning. Those are the big ones that we felt with intensity. But right now, what voters see is training and skills. They see local community support. They're on the cusp of some allowing success and hard work. They're on the cusp of compensation, but there is some ongoing disconnect and differentiation by partisanship, certainly. So going forward for companies, the question for many of them is not only who are their consumers, but what do they both believe and value? And the same sort of test should be done and look into their own employees, their local communities in which they operate, their investors. There's going to be a different set for each of these audiences. But clearly for the electorate writ large, there is some disconnect between voters. That's the end of this summary. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have. Again, this poll is sponsored by Advocus Partners, and we thank you for coming, and this will be available online to anyone who wants to take a look at it later.